Unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented TV. Hello and welcome to Countdown with me, Basil Valentine. Today, Thursday, the 28th of August, 2025. And I'm pleased to say I'm in my new look studio, suited and booted, bespectacled and ready to go. This is the first of the new look show. I'll be counting down the top stories of the day, providing you with my own news edit, reordering from the propaganda that you get on the mainstream media, and presenting what I think are the most important and entertaining stories to look at. Starting today, Thursday, the 28th of August, where it's 1 o'clock in London, 2 o'clock in Paris, 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Moscow, and of course 8 a.m. over in New York. Number one story on the countdown today, the United Nations Security Council, a full 19-20 months, is it, after the International Criminal Court declared that there was a plausible case that genocide is being committed in Gaza. They finally got round to issuing some kind of meaningful collective statement yesterday, although, of course, the United States ducked out because we all know who controls the United States these days. Nevertheless, their description of a man-made famine is something of a watershed. And let's get that statement now in full from New York, where, of course, the General Assembly is due to meet in the coming weeks, something that promises fireworks with several countries, including possibly Britain and France, recognizing a Palestinian state. Where exactly it's supposed to be, I've no idea, but here we are. Here is the UN statement from the Security Council yesterday. The reason I put this at the top of the program is that there's no word of it on the front page of The Guardian, which, of course, like all corporate news outlets for the last 2 years, has done everything it can to bury the genocide in Gaza as a story, unless it's actually forced to do otherwise.
We express our profound alarm and distress at the IPC data on Gaza published last Friday. It clearly and unequivocally confirms famine in the Gaza governorate. We trust the IPC's work and methodology. This is the first time famine has been officially confirmed in the Middle East region. Every day, more persons are dying as a result of malnutrition, many of them children. We are alarmed by the report that famine is projected to expand to the Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis by the end of September. At the same time, across the Gaza Strip, nearly 1.5 million people are facing emergency and crisis levels of food insecurity. We stand in front of you, especially disturbed by the levels of acute malnutrition among children in Gaza. We note that at least 41,000 children are at heightened risk of death from malnutrition between now and June 2026. This is a man-made crisis. The use of starvation as a weapon of war is clearly prohibited under international humanitarian law. Famine in Gaza must be stopped immediately. International humanitarian law must be respected, and Security Council Resolution 2417 of 2018 must be implemented.
1. We call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire. We call for the immediate, dignified, and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other groups. We call for a substantive surge of humanitarian assistance throughout Gaza. 2. Israel must immediately and unconditionally lift all restrictions on aid delivery. This includes opening all land routes and allowing the UN and humanitarian partners to operate safely and at scale. Humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence must be central to humanitarian action. We call on Israel to immediately reverse its decision to further expand its military operation in Gaza with the aim of taking over Gaza City. This decision, which we reject, will inevitably worsen the already horrific humanitarian situation and endanger the lives of all civilians, including the hostages. Time is of the essence. The humanitarian emergency must be addressed without delay, and Israel must reverse course. We have seen what is possible to achieve during a ceasefire.
Now, what gets me about these statements is that they're never backed up by any action. Nobody is going to do anything. That's why the Protect Palestine organization has been set up. There's no mention either of the global flotilla, which is setting off from Barcelona and Tunis in the coming days to break the siege of Gaza and actually physically do something to end the man-made famine. The United Nations, once vaunted as the embryonic world government, has been shown to be absolutely toothless, utterly impotent, pointless organization, particularly, of course, with the US veto. But even without it, the Israelis don't pay any attention to these so-called diplomats and their mediocre statements. We call on, I mean, it just means absolutely nothing. The UK representative to the United Nations is the rather muscular Dame Barbara Woodward, and she had this to say yesterday at the Security Council.
The IPC's confirmation of famine in Gaza City marks the first officially recorded famine in modern history in the Middle East. It is entirely man-made, and, as my Foreign Secretary has said, it is a moral outrage. Over 100 children in Gaza have died of malnutrition, while food is sitting at Gaza's borders. Israel's attack on Nasser Hospital this weekend, killing civilians, health workers, and journalists, is appalling. The United Kingdom has been clear that Hamas must immediately release all the hostages taken on the 7th of October and lay down their weapons. Israel's decision to approve plans for settlement construction in the E1 area in the West Bank, if implemented, would be a flagrant breach of international law, and it will take us further away from peace. Israel must retract these plans. The United Kingdom opposes any actions which undermine the viability of the two-state solution and the long-term goal of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace and security. Now is the moment for the parties to redouble their efforts to secure an immediate ceasefire. This is the path to end the suffering in Gaza, secure the release of the hostages, and deliver a framework for lasting peace in the region.
Released by the UK at the United Nations. I mean, it's getting to the point of being comic, really, a darkly tragicomic that people like Barbara Woodward are still parroting something about the two-state solution when Israeli politicians have made it clear they've no interest whatsoever. In fact, the Knesset passed a resolution only the other day declaring that they're going to take the West Bank over completely and attempt to make it Israeli sovereign territory. But just to go back for a moment to the appalling war crime caught on camera, the so-called double tap on the Nasser hospital, it's been reported that the Israeli military said that soldiers were trying to destroy a Hamas camera, and photos have been circulating on the internet of indeed a Canon camera with a large telephoto lens, soaked in blood. 20 people, medical workers, were killed. Dozens of others mutilated, of course, very serious injuries, all to destroy a Hamas camera. So, if you're dealing with people like that, what attention do you think they're going to pay to the mealy-mouthed words of diplomats in the UN? The Israelis have never had any regard for the UN whatsoever. A poll came out recently showing that 3/4 of them believe there are no innocents at all in Gaza. And this woman is typical of the current mindset. This is from the X platform.
אז ראיתי שביבי נתניהו ביקש סליחה. אז אני רוצה להגיד תודה לחיילים שלנו שפוצצתם את הבית חולים. ככה עושים, ככה נלחמים. אין עליכם בעולם. שתדעו לכם, וואלה, רוב עם ישראל שולח לכם נשיקות וחיבוקים ואומר לכם תודה ענקית. כי אנחנו רוצים לכבוש ואנחנו רוצים לנצח ואנחנו רוצים להיות אסטרטגיים וחסרי רחמים מול האויב שלנו. אנחנו רוצים להתיישב בעזה, ובזכות חיילים כמוכם עוד נעשה את זה. אשריכם ישראל, תודה רבה. תמשיכו לבצע את הפקודות האמיתיות שצריך לבצע. לא לשבור מצלמות, לשבור את האנשים. יאללה, חיים לחיים. בקרוב, בעזרת השם, נשב על אדמת עזה היהודית, ששייכת לנו מדורי דורות.
So that's the kind of psychopath you're dealing with. I labeled that psychopath number 1, and here is psychopath number 2, celebrating the murder of journalists.
אפשר לומר שאנחנו כמעט לא נמצאים בזירה התודעתית לצערנו, ואם כבר ישראל מחליטה לחסל את העיתונאים, אז עדיף מאוחר מאשר אף פעם לא. ורק כדי להבין, אלו עיתונאים שמסתתרים בבתי חולים, שפותחים שם חמ"לים, שמשדרים לעולם תמונה.
Journalists hide in hospital rooms, apparently, so they're legitimate targets, according to him, journalists. They just shouldn't be hiding in hospitals. Israel's always liked to carry out its crimes in the dark, but we really are in a new era of barbarity. None of it, of course, would be possible without the support of the United Kingdom, which continues to supply arms for all Barbara Woodward's words there at the UN. Nothing actually happens. David Lammy still quite happy to dance around with the genocide heirs. The European Union has done absolutely nothing. The moral turpitude is absolutely off the charts. Here in the UK, of course, we've got the upcoming visit of Israel's supporter-in-chief, Donald Trump, President of the United States. Now, it's come out in the last couple of days that he, and of all people, the demon Tony Blair, who should really have been in jail, perhaps now after 20 odd years, the possibility of parole should be being discussed for Blair after he led us illegally into the Iraq war. Instead, of course, he's had his pockets stuffed with money by the globalist elite. He also prances around the world stage, posing occasionally as some sort of Middle East peace envoy. Well, of course, he and Trump and various consultancies have been looking at the very valuable Mediterranean Riviera real estate of Gaza and planning to build condominiums, swimming pools and hotels on the bones of murdered children. We really are in the realms of a particularly ghoulish hell at the moment. Trump due, of course, for a state visit to Britain in the not too distant future. He's going to get a very rough reception from the British public. I can tell him that. All sorts of people across the political spectrum had some sort of minor or major interest in Trump as possibly a Washington outsider when first elected. In fact, he famously eviscerated Jeb Bush on the debate stage back in 2016, saying that the Iraq war had been a nightmare and a disaster and a mistake. He promised before getting in this time that he was going to end the wars. Of course, he's done no such thing. But other politicians in the UK, and notably here, Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, say they're going to have nothing to do with the man supplying the bombs, the bullets, the dollars, and the diplomatic cover for the Gaza Holocaust.
We can't allow him to leave our country without him realizing we believe it is his responsibility to stop this.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site.
Well, you know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think it's an incredible piece of important real estate.
I never thought I'd have to make this decision. Next month, Donald Trump will come to the UK for a state banquet. I've been invited, but my wife and I won't be going. It's an enormous honor to be invited by the King, who I have huge respect for. But it's only by not attending that I get the opportunity to make this case. The people of Gaza are starving. Just last week, the UN-backed IPC declared an entirely man-made famine in Gaza City. Children are dying. Hostages are still being held. And Donald Trump is the only man who can stop this. He has real influence over Netanyahu, over Qatar and the other Gulf states, over those with the power to end this.
And I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars.
If Donald Trump chose to act, the killing would stop, and he would put real pressure on those holding hostages. He could force the issue. In the UK, you'll be honoured with a lavish dinner from one of our finest palaces. We can't allow him to leave our country without him realising we believe it is his responsibility to stop this. Boycotting the banquet is the one way I can send a message to Donald Trump and Keir Starmer too, because they can't close their eyes and just wish this away. We have to speak up. They have to act. Donald Trump has to end this humanitarian crisis.
It's more than a humanitarian crisis, Ed. It's a man-made Holocaust. And boycotting the dinner may be one thing, but Trump, Starmer, and the rest of them belong in The Hague. Trump, of course, and we move on now to the number 2 story on the countdown, is famous for putting his business associates and assorted chums into positions of power for which they're not remotely qualified. Most notably, of course, Mike Huckabee's ludicrous performance as the US ambassador to Israel. But another one is Tom Barak. Yes, that same Tom Barak that's mentioned in the Epstein papers. He's apparently the ambassador to Turkey. He's not a diplomat at all. And he made that very clear when insulting Lebanese journalists on a recent visit, as we can hear now.
Please be quiet for a moment. And I want to tell you something. The moment that this starts becoming chaotic, like animalistic, we're gone. So you want to know what's happening? Act civilized, act kind, act tolerant, because this is the problem with what's happening in the region.
Civilized, right. Like the US invasion of Iraq was civilized. Or how about civilized, like using Agent Orange in Vietnam, which poisoned millions, destroyed land, and caused birth defects for generations. Civilized, like being the only nation to drop nuclear bombs on civilians. Oh, and of course, civilized, like sending billions and billions in weapons to the rogue state of Israel to fund its genocide. Because, of course, the animalistic ones are the ones receiving the bombs. Right? The uncivilized ones are the ones being starved to death. Right? Kiss Ummak is civilized. Since you're in Lebanon, how about you learn a couple of words?
As I said, Tom Barak is mentioned in the Epstein files, along with Peter Thiel. What he's got doing masquerading as some sort of diplomat these days, I've absolutely no idea. The US drags itself deeper and deeper into the gutter, And Barak was, I'm delighted to say, eviscerated by the Syrian journalist Gadi Francis, as we can hear now.
Asking me to speak up against the American envoy Tom Barak. I feel so sorry for the United States of America for having such diplomats. I mean, there was a time when your diplomats knew better or spoke better. I can't even imagine this person who has been tried in the United States of America trying to become a diplomat. He's a diplomat wannabe, coming and insulting the whole region. He's telling us we need to act kind and civilized. Tom, animalistic and uncivilized is Jeffrey Epstein, your buddy, your best friend. We don't know how much you have been involved with him and with the child molestation mafia that he had. Animalistic is invading Iraq and killing over 1 million people for nothing. Animalistic is staying in Afghanistan and killing the Afghani people for over a decade and then handing it to Taliban. Animalistic is your ally in Syria, the one that bombs mosques and churches and slaughters people. Animalistic is what you've done to Libya. Animalistic is what you've done to the whole region. Animalistic is the genocidal regime you protect in occupied Palestine, that kills journalists on cam for a sport, that starves children on cam in live real-time coverage. And you have the audacity to come and tell us to act civilized? This is where civilization started. You have been trying for so hard to become a Lebanese, to claim a Lebanese identity, because you have no civilization. And if you tell yourself you're Lebanese, you might get a chance at being civilized. You come and you say this to the press inside the presidential palace. This while you go with your ally, the Israelis, who kill journalists for a sport, trying to protect them furthermore, without even getting us any concessions while our land is occupied, while our skies are being, every day they're being breached. The ceasefire deal that you harbored in Lebanon is just a joke. Your mediation is just a joke. You couldn't even free any Lebanese prisoner, any Lebanese civilian. You couldn't even get any concession from the genocidal occupation in Israel, from the people who were tried by the ICC for war crimes. And you have the audacity to come and say and defend Israel from the Lebanese podiums, and to even talk to Lebanese journalists like that. Animalistic is you and the administration that sends envoys like you. Do you remember what happened in the 80s in Lebanon? There was one language to be spoken to the Americans in Lebanon. And if you continue to send Barbies and condescending pigs, this is what you're going to get from Lebanon.
Pleased to say the American people do seem to be waking up very slowly to the fact that their Congress, the entire administration, has been completely captured by people who are not only deeply sinister, but also thoroughly incompetent. And the sooner this appalling administration comes to an end, the better. A lot of people speculating that Donald Trump is in fact extremely ill and may not last it out. But would J.D. Vance be any better? Well, we'll have to wait and see on that one. We move on to the number 3 story on the countdown today and head down to South America, where the libertarian president Javier Milei is finding himself in all sorts of hot water and was lucky just yesterday to escape a crowd that set on him. This footage comes from The Guardian.
Veníamos todo en caravana y empezaron a volar cascotes, pero terribles, así. Ya mostré uno que me pegó en la espalda, casi me da en la cabeza, al presidente le tiraban de todo. Tuvo que doblar acá e irse porque es inevitable. Si te llueve en cascote, hay un volquete acá puesto a propósito con escombro.
Que venga solamente en época de campaña justamente a los barrios, a enrostrarnos, digamos, que se haya pasado los 18 meses viajando al exterior para recibir premios falopa, disculpen la expresión, y que no se dedique justamente a recorrer los barrios, el conurbano, las provincias. ¿Cuántas provincias recorrió en 18 meses de gestión para justamente ver lo que son las obras que faltan, las escuelas cómo se caen a pedazos, los hospitales, digamos, y toda la obra que ha parado hace 18 meses para ver justamente las reales problemáticas y no justamente para burlarse de los vecinos que venimos justamente a expresarle la bronca, ni más ni menos que nuestro derecho también?
Do go to The Guardian. Now, on top of that, Javier Milei's administration is facing far and away its worst corruption scandal involving none other than his hugely influential sister, Karina. And this is just a couple of months before key legislative elections. Doubtless, this played a part in that. Those angry scenes. For more than a week, news in the country has been dominated by audio recordings in which a former government official is heard discussing the alleged payment of bribes linked to the purchase of medicines for disabled people. In the recordings, Diego Spagnuolo, the head of the National Disability Agency and a former Milei lawyer, claimed that the sister of the self-styled anarcho-capitalist allegedly pocketed 3% from each contract. Spagnuolo initially denied it was him in the tapes, but was later forced to admit it and was dismissed by the government after the furore. After days of silence, Milei then appeared alongside his sister, who is an influential figure in the administration, at a campaign rally and asked the crowd to give her a big ovation. The wild-haired president has been celebrated by all sorts of figures, but this scandal could yet bring down his administration, certainly according to Juan Correll, an expert in political communication. The scandal first emerged earlier this month when the streaming channel Carnival released the first audio of the recordings. I must admit, I'm no fan of Milei. And on top of that, his neoliberal policies, which stand in stark contrast, incidentally, which is something we'll look at perhaps tomorrow, to the new president of Mexico. But Milei is determined to privatize his country's water. He wants to go down that dreaded neoliberal path, which only impoverishes a country's citizens and which has been such a disaster in all sorts of places, including, of course, here in the United Kingdom, where we are still suffering the ill effects of the dreaded water privatization, rail privatization, and everything else. Now we come to number 5 story on the countdown, and inevitably it's Ukraine. I'm going to be joined in a couple of minutes by my old sparring partner, geopolitical analyst from Sweden, author and intellectual Peli Niroth-Taylor. But first, here's the take of DW News, the German outlet, on last night's attacks by Russia on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev.
Russia has launched what Ukraine called a massive overnight attack on Kyiv, killing at least 14 people and injuring dozens more. Ukrainian officials say children are among the dead. Nearly 100 buildings have been damaged, including several high-rise apartment buildings. The combined missile and drone attack is the first to hit the Ukrainian capital in several weeks, as US efforts to broker peace appear to have stalled. Let's cross straight to Kyiv and speak to our correspondent there, Namisha Jaiswal. Namisha is at the European Union delegation's building, which we're hearing was also damaged during the overnight Russian strike. So, Namisha, what more can you tell us? Describe where you are.
Well, Anna, the impact is really evident here. We are right outside the door of the EU delegation office, and The door, of course, is offline. There is a window that's been completely blown out right above. And if I could also show you more damage towards the other end of the building, all of these are EU delegation offices. And this is some of the impact you're seeing. But as we were walking down the street towards this office as well, shattered glass everywhere. Of course, rescue and emergency operations respond immediately. But there's clear impact all down the street, lots of blown out windows as we walk towards here. And this is clearly a residential and office area. So no clear military targets as far as we can tell over here. And of course, EU top officials have responded, have commented on this, condemning the action. Now, of course, attacking embassies or diplomatic missions is against conventions and has so far not really had that much of a precedent. This is, of course, the impact of strikes elsewhere, but this has been condemned widely, and the Ukrainian foreign minister has even called this a violation of the Vienna Convention and urged action. Nobody here was injured or hurt because this was an overnight attack, but this has raised serious concerns about the safety of diplomatic missions here.
Ukraine is calling these attacks overnight on Kyiv. It's describing them as massive. Can you tell us a bit more about the scale of the attacks and the damage that's been done throughout the city?
I mean, that assessment sounds pretty fair, Anya. We literally felt buildings sway between 3 and 6 a.m. This morning, but there was an air raid alert on throughout the night, over 9 hours, again in the morning, again for over 2 hours. And we know, according to the armed forces, that at least 629 missiles and drones headed this way, including ballistic Kinjal missiles as well as Kh-101 cruise missiles. And at least 14 people have been reported killed. Of course, rescue missions are ongoing, and this death toll may well rise. This includes 3 children. And this is clearly a very difficult time here. There have been attacks all across the country over the last days, but in Kyiv, this has been the first major attack of the last couple of weeks, and a lot of frustration and anger. There's been a response from, especially strongly worded response from President Zelensky, who said that this clearly shows Russia's response to peace negotiations, that they do not want to come to the negotiating table, that they prefer talking through ballistic missiles, and that he wants strong action to be taken against Russia.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. That's DW's Nimisha Jaiswal reporting from Kyiv. Thanks, Nimisha.
And thanks indeed to DW News for that report. I'm delighted to say I'm joined but now, and you can see him too there on screen, by my old sparring partner and friend, the academic, filmmaker, journalist and broadcaster, Peli Neroth-Taylor. Welcome to the programme, Peli.
Great to see you again, Basil. It's been a while, but it's wonderful to talk to you. We've talked offline as well, so I'm well up to date on your career developments. But it's nice to see on this new forum,
shiny new platform, yes, where I count down the top stories of the day, and then joined by a guest. World News, of course, has got the overnight strikes by Russia on Kyiv as the #1 story, to the exclusion of anything else that's going on in the world. I would venture to suggest that actually, in terms of the overall impact on human beings, the degree of suffering caused, it pales into insignificance by the day next to the daily events in Gaza. But as we know, global corporate media sources always want to go with the Russophobia, don't they? They always want to point out how demonic and evil Putin is, and to downplay the Israelis, on the other hand, Peli.
Well, I mean, Deutsche Welle, DW, is terrible. I'm sorry to say that. I mean, the Germans are infected by, or the German establishment is affected by Russophobia to a very great degree, possibly even bigger than the UK. And it's very, very conformist. And I noticed the day after Merz was elected, DW changed their tone from being mildly Russophobic to even more Russophobic. So they have a very good eye on what the masters in the chancellery, what they want told. And it's like the Zelensky's press office, isn't it? I mean, Zelensky says that, Zelensky says this, Zelensky urges, Zelensky warns. I mean, that's every headline. And it's like the Guardian, Who cares what Zelensky says? I mean, he's not the big player. What are the Russians saying? What are the Americans saying? It's pointless. It's virtue signaling. And as he said, I mean, if 12 died in Kiev, it's Kiev, by the way, in English, not Kyiv. I mean, why don't we say Moskva and München? You know, Kiev had 12 dead. Well, I mean, I think the overall civilian death toll in the Ukraine war is like 3%. You know, so it's probably the lowest per capita of any war in recent decades. Whereas the death toll in Gaza was 83% civilians, and that's the highest death toll of civilians in any recent war ever, probably. You know, and it was more the death toll in Gaza has just overtaken the death toll in Nagasaki bombing in the 1945, and I guess it'll soon overtake the Hiroshima bombing. But we don't hear about that from DW. You know, I mean, the Germans are going from one mistake to another. They're going from the Holocaust. They're going from committing one genocide to defending another genocide. I mean, they can never get it right, can they? They really poor judgment of the Germans, I think. Anyway.
Well, absolutely. And that poor judgment was demonstrated by the election of the truly abysmal Merz. I mean, you know, he's one of those where just when you think it couldn't get any worse than his predecessor, along comes this weird egg-headed moron. I don't like to mince my words, but you know, he seems intellectually bereft, morally bankrupt. I'm amazed at some of the people that get the top jobs in Europe these days.
Well, you wonder if they're all under blackmail or something. I mean, that was we could talk about it later, but I've been increasingly fascinated by that and trying to look behind the news. And I'm never interested in sexual issues or financial corruption shenanigans. But I'm thinking maybe more and more of these things allow just yay-sayers to get elected. I mean, you certainly see that in Scandinavia. And all over Eastern Europe, you have these kind of Brussels, what do you call them? Factory chickens. What's the word in English? You know, who are kind of raised in the Brussels bubble, and then they're pretty women, and suddenly they get to the top. And you know, you can be sure that the sort of Balkan peasant didn't vote for them, but they're creatures of the system. And on top of that, there might be various sort of deep state shenanigans, cheating, arbitrary arrests, and I don't know in case of Merz at all, but blackmail I might play a role. But Merz is, yeah, I mean, he's massively unpopular already. You know, I mean, because it's this divide. He's still set on confronting Russia militarily. Having forgotten the big lesson of last century, Bismarck said, "We must never fight the Russians. Germany will only prosper peace in Europe will only prosper when there's peace and good relations between the Russians and the Germans." And then, of course, a succession of German statesmen forgot that lesson, and we ruined European civilization as a result. So we didn't ruin it in the 2020s, as many people seem to think. We ruined it probably in 1918 and 1945. You know, we had everything before 1914. Anyway. So the Germans are now confronting that, and he's heedless of the criticism in Germany, and the mainstream media, which the DW is a shining example, are just going along with it. I mean, they're probably even worse than the Scandinavian and the UK media. In the UK media is actually seeing signs of dissent now, so that's a positive sign. But I don't think the Germans are, and I think that their political elite is completely clueless. I mean, they're completely Atlanticist. They say things that are completely shamelessly that of a colonized nation. You know, Israel's good, and the Putin is Hitler. They really seem to believe that, and then well, we've got a mutual friend, Dirk, who's an old leftist, and he says he can't talk to his former Green friends because they're really totally brainwashed. I mean, which think tanks did they emerge from? Who paid them? You know, did they only get entry into university because they had the right views? It's quite incredible. You know, this Gleichschaltung that they have in Germany. But I don't know if it'll lead to anything. I mean, I said the Germans, might take many years to rearm, and by then we might have a solid peace in Ukraine between the Russians and the Americans. So that's what I'm hoping, that it's all just talk. You know, because I noticed that. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say let's hope so, but at the moment the prospects for peace in Ukraine seem to be on the wane. The talks in Alaska were something of a high watermark. Let's discuss the prospects for peace after just this quick report from Sky News.
First, Vladimir Putin went to Alaska.
And then Volodymyr Zelensky went to the White House, flanked by European allies.
But now the diplomatic dust has settled. How much has actually changed since those summits?
And is peace really any closer?
Mr. Putin, will you agree to a ceasefire? Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
The big thing that came out of Alaska was an apparent breakthrough on this issue of future security guarantees for Ukraine. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff claimed that Moscow had given the green light to a NATO-style mutual defence mandate.
That was music to Europe's ears, where many countries have been scrambling to boost their militaries as a direct result of Russian aggression, and arms companies like this one have been ramping up production.
It's going to be fantastic, actually.
Cue relief in Washington when America said it would back them up.
They are first line of defense because they're Europe, but we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
But it's still not clear what those security guarantees will look like. Will there be European boots on the ground? If so, whose boots and how many?
Mr. Pistorius, what security guarantees is Germany actually putting on the table to help Ukraine?
We can do, of course, we consider every contribution we might be able and willing to deliver to provide for security guarantees for Ukraine, but we don't discuss that now publicly. Obviously, Germany is the biggest supporter of Ukraine after the US, and our role will become even more important in the months and years to come.
The first layer for Ukraine to defend itself will be the Ukrainian armed forces. That is the base, that is the first layer that will be extremely important. NATO is involved there, many NATO allies are involved there, building Ukrainian armed forces going forward after a long-term ceasefire / hopefully even better a peace deal.
More importantly, it increasingly sounds like Russia hasn't actually agreed to this plan after all, because over the last week, Moscow has repeatedly made it clear it has problems with it, especially if it involves European troops.
Все замыслы связаны, по сути дела, с предоставлением гарантий путем интервенции, иностранной интервенции военной на какую-то часть украинской территории, но надеюсь, что они понимают, что это будет абсолютно неприемлемо для Российской Федерации.
And that's not all. The only security guarantee Moscow says it'll accept is one it's involved in, where Ukraine's invader becomes its protector and guarantor.
Чи заради української безпеки, нашого суверенітету, нашої територіальної цілісності. Бо агресор – Росія. Коли Росія підіймає питання щодо гарантій безпеки, я, чесно кажучи, поки що не знаю, хто їм загрожує. Вони на нас напали, і вони на нашій стороні. І я не зовсім розумію, які гарантії потрібні агресору.
Что всерьез обсуждать вопросы обеспечения безопасности без Российской Федерации – это утопия, это путь в никуда.
So what about this meeting between Zelensky and Putin? Well, that doesn't seem any closer either. Last week, Donald Trump said the two sides were setting it up.
But that's not how it sounds here in Moscow, where the Kremlin's been repeating its usual line that these things can't be rushed.
Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky when the agenda would be ready for a summit. And this agenda is not ready at all. How can we meet with a person who is pretending to be a leader?
The issue here is that the Kremlin doesn't view Zelensky as a legitimate leader, and it's hinted that he'd need to be re-elected before there's any meeting and before any peace deal can be signed.
While few in Europe believe Russia is serious about peace.
So despite that flurry of diplomatic activity, it's pretty clear that fundamental stumbling blocks remain.
There's still no agreement on security guarantees, still no plans for a leaders' meeting, and the war rages on.
We're indebted to Sky News for that report. I learned a few things there, Peli. I wasn't aware that the Russians no longer regard Zelensky as being a legitimate leader. I'm inclined to agree with them. He cancelled the elections. I think he'd probably lose an election. So it's understandable that the Russians would like to see a Ukrainian plebiscite, which would no doubt elect a genuine peace president, somebody who is indeed willing to cede the eastern territories currently occupied by Russia to Russia in exchange for peace.
Well, I mean, I thought that was quite a fair report, actually, apart from the last comment by that woman saying a few in Europe believe Russia believes in peace. How does she know? I mean, no doubt few in the press pack going to that summit at NATO thought that they're all Russophobes. But I mean, have they asked them? Over half the population, I think, in Europe wants peace. Most 60 or 70% of the Ukrainians now want land for peace. And the other thing, of course, is I just want to pick up on Zelensky saying they've come into our country. What do they want? Well, I mean, that part is Russian speaking and pro-Russian. Back in 2010, when they had proper opinion polls in Ukraine, something like 20% of Ukraine's then population wanted actual adherence, political adherence to Russia. Presumably that was at 20% living in the Donbass. And then another 60% wanted a border-free Nordic Scandi Union type relationship with Russia. And only 6%, that is, the West Ukrainians, wanted a sort of remote relationship with Russia, like you have with other foreign, strange countries. So that was before all this started, all this was launched by the West using their assets in West Ukraine to create provocations and a mess. So he was telling a lie there. I think it's quite right if this goes to Russia, because they speak Russian, they're pro-Russian. And back in Kosovo in 1999, the Kosovans were allowed to leave Serbia because most of them voted for separation. Why can't we? So the West is showing double standards there. Anyway, I think I don't know if they're going to have a plebiscite. I mean, the rumors going, I've listened to a lot of podcasts, so I can't always source everything, but people with sources who have contacts. It could be, I don't know, McGregor or someone who thinks that the reason why Zelensky looked so cheerful at that European meeting in Washington the other day was, Trump guaranteed him a golden parachute, a nice house in Miami, and maybe even walk-on parts in the next Hollywood films, and the reasons why the Europeans were so gloomy was that they hadn't been given that support that they were hoping. So if Zelensky's on his way out, I don't think there's going to be an honest election. I think that the interesting thing is the Brits said that we'll take care of the Ukrainian elections. And I think they'll make sure to get some of their own people in. And I thought it was going to be Zaluzhny. And again, Zaluzhny is currently the ambassador to London, which gives rise to the question of whether he's a UK intelligence asset, that prince in waiting that they want to plant on Ukraine, carry on the war. But then I've also heard that he's actually a kind of peacemaker, and that the Russians will be very happy to have him. And that means that the Russians have won the war and that the West has lost. I think it's very important for the Russians. I mean, all this focus on territory and everything. The important thing is the Russians don't want a Western regime in Kiev. They want a neutral regime. And that's what that political fight is, what it's all ultimately going to come down to, and they don't trust the West not to do that, because they planted pro-Westerners all over Eastern Europe. Even they tried it in Georgia. It's their modus operandi, and I was just reading up on the Libya war again, as you know, because I've been doing a lot of work on what MI6 have been doing around the world, and because there's a lot of rumors. I was recently in the UK thinking that all this import of Muslim young males is basically fighting age males to suppress the British population. I think that's one conspiracy too far, but it's certainly true that the Brits have used jihadists all over the Middle East for decades to disrupt the civilian governments, even though they're not nice dictatorships. And they certainly use that in Libya. And MI6 were in the background all the time there in Libya, and they were planted, and they were using exactly the same words. We're staying in the background, we're not going to get involved, as MI6 and the British deep state are using as an argument to put in a security guarantee. So if you give them an inch, they'll take an arm. And that's why the Russians don't trust this security guarantee talk. However little they agree to, the Brits are always going to take advantage of it. And if they've hooked in the Americans, the Ukrainians are going to run all the way to the races with that guarantee and maybe provoke a war, continued fighting or something, or have maximalist demands and then hook in the Americans if they'll fire at the Russians will fire back. Suddenly you have World War III. So I think the security guarantees, given all my books and studies on World War I, is an absolute no-go, and Trump must not go along with that. You'd be absolute fool to do so. And I just hope that all his words is just playing around with the Europeans and spinning them along, basically. The serious security guarantee for the Europeans is a guarantee of a third world war. It's guaranteed to help the extremists in Ukraine carry out provocations. And it's even worse than it's going to be worse than any situation hitherto. I mean, before 2022, famously, there was no security guarantee of Ukraine. I mean, there's a Budapest Memorandum in 94, but it wasn't serious. So if the Russian, and most people agree the Russians are winning. If they were to agree to a security guarantee, they'll actually be worse off than at any time in Ukraine's post-Cold War history. So why would they go along with that? So the only thing I can think happening, the Russians are going to say that's an absolute red line, is that the Europeans are doing this because they don't want peace, and they're going to place an impossible demand to the Russians and then blame the failure of the peace talks on the Russians. The second possibility is that the Russians will continue grinding towards the Dnieper River, and then Zelensky will make a unilateral ceasefire, and that will be the trigger for the Europeans to insert troops. And then we're in unknown territory. If the Europeans have their American security guarantee in the pocket, and that's what they're working on right now, they're working on it 24 hours a day, then they'll have a big stick with which to shake at the Russians, and everyone will try and game that American involvement. The Americans might be sucked in. And I sometimes do worry about Trump. I don't know if he knows he's getting senile. He's got so many things on his plate. He's so nonchalant. He doesn't care. Or as some people believe, he is actually a secret raging neocon who wants war with Russians, but just has to please his MAGA voters that he's actually a peacenik. I don't know.
A couple of things I'll pick up on there. First of all, Kiev hasn't got time on its hands, and therefore nor do the Europeans. They should really take what's on offer now, shouldn't they, Pele? Because Kiev's battlefield position is eroding rapidly, with Russia making gains in the Donbass and elsewhere, and it's only a matter of time before their front line collapses, whereupon whatever is on offer now from the Russians is much better than what will be on offer in 3 or 6 months' time. And secondly, for our listeners, those two words, security guarantees, which seem to be at the heart of it, what do they actually mean? Break it down. You know, that there are going to be NATO troops or something as peacekeepers. What is it? It's just two words, you know.
Well, that's. I mean, the thing is, sometimes you see, well, you need vagueness in diplomacy to keep everyone happy, but through those vaguenesses, wars start because people interpret them differently, and that's what worries me. I mean, the very fact that Trump makes a loose promise and he thinks it's not a problem. It's not going to be a problem, and he's got so many other things on his plate. So he says, "Yeah, sure, I'll support you." And then he puts the Europeans put in troops at the far end of Ukraine, and then there's a provocation. Either the Ukrainians fire first or the Russians fire first. I mean, these things always happen, but it could be. I mean, the Ukrainians want America in the war. Make no mistake about that. So to give them any kind of say-so in if a new war is going to start is insane. Okay. That's their only chance of victory, just like Britain's only chance of victory in 1941 was bringing in the Americans. And that's ditto in 1915, which is why the Brits helped to sink the Lusitania. They knew exactly where it was going, right into the German U-boat, because they wanted to get the public opinions to be so upset with the Germans that the Americans would be brought into the war. That's what it's not just one country. It's probably a standard thing in history. I think if they put in 3 brigades or so, which the Brits and French are very keen to do, and then what will happen is this incredible propaganda machinery, you know, just goes on all the time. It'll be drag in the Europeans, drag in the Americans.
I want to do a hard pivot now, if possible, Pele. I mean, it seems like the Ukraine farrago is set to rumble on almost interminably. I mean, you know, like all wars, it must surely come to an end at some point. But I agree, at the moment, it's very difficult to see a path out of it other than total defeat for Ukraine, and obviously the disappearance of Zelensky, who is a problem.
Well, let's hope you're right. The best way to end a war is to lose it, as they say. You know, I don't care about Ukraine. I mean, it's a Russian-speaking, pro-Russian part of the world. You know, I mean, I think it's a British and a European elite issue. They don't know much about Ukraine either, except that allows them to play out their Winston Churchill fantasies. You know.
Yeah, no, exactly. But of course, we must defend European values. This is the thing,
right?
We must defend
European bureaucrats' jobs. They can become warmongers rather than people who worry about widgets. You know, I mean, they're walking tall down there in Brussels. They think they're growing hair on their chests.
Right, but if they have their way, they'd like to gag people like us, Pele, dissenters, dissidents, even. Dissidents are being rounded up in Britain, particularly over the Palestine issue, people who want to take direct action to prevent the genocide. On that subject, tomorrow I'll have a report on a new direct action group called Palestinian Martyrs for Justice, who appear to be carrying on the work of the now proscribed organization Palestine Action. But there's a case going through which you highlighted with me this morning, 4chan and another platform suing because their First Amendment rights are being breached. I've noticed now age verification requirements popping up on social media. I was asked this morning to verify my age in order to watch some content on X. That's the first time I've ever noticed that. And we know how keen the Brits are to clamp down on freedom of speech. America, of course, likes to pretend it's the great champion of freedom of speech on all matters, except, of course, Palestine. Where are we going with this, Pelly?
Well, I was in the UK recently for a month, and I noticed that I was searching on X for sort of kind of videos, and it's hard to say. That's the most sinister thing about censorship. You don't know when it's going on because you don't know what you can't see, right? There's just this vague feeling that less interesting information is being left out. And then I went to archive.org, which is which has the Wayback Machine, and which allows you to check out old websites, from 2014. So people take down stuff, but the internet never forgets. So when people say the internet never forgets, they mean they're referring to the Wayback Machine, which takes a snapshot of every web page ever published. And that's now subject to age verification. And that's a kind of essential research tool, I mean, it's not for saving children or all that. It's basically, it shows the power of MI6 in the UK. And I'm amazed that they're taking on the Americans because, as said, the Americans make it, I agree with you that Trump talks big on free speech, but then they censor anti-Israel criticism and so on. On balance, I think that there is a healthier climate. I haven't been to the States for many years, but when we had our shows on the other channel, Basil, we had a lot of American guests, and I noticed that they were more open-minded. They didn't have that gremlin on their shoulders that I sometimes felt that with British guests. So anyway, two of the I'm just reading here. The two of the internet's most free speech supporting platforms, 4chan and Kiwi Farms, are taking their fight for online free speech to court, targeting the UK's communications regulator. So Ofcom is taking an American company which mostly publishes to an American audience because they have a few readers in the UK. What the hell is that? Who the hell do they think they are? And I guess what they can do is they can geo-block it so that UK viewers can't get to these websites. But the presumption of it somehow, they're really setting themselves up for it because they're going right into the cannon fire. It's like one of those I don't know my American civil 1776 war, but it's like the British redcoats walking right into an American enfilade because the Brits can't win this. 4chan, who is a kind of conspiracy website, just go to their DC court and say, well, what are they doing? They don't have any legislative power over us in the USA, so piss off. End of case. And then it's going to cause a lot of anger in the MAGA movement. And Britain's very unpopular already. Anyway.
Well, the thing about the age verification is that it's not just age. You have to prove your identity. I was asked to show a passport. So,
Right.
I wouldn't mind. I could prove my age. I only really need to show them the receding hairline or something to prove my age. But what you're actually being asked to do is demonstrate who you are. And therefore, if you are accessing particularly interesting or sensitive information about certain subjects, then that may very well be noted for future reference, Pele.
It's terrible. It's terrible. And Europe, Sweden feels freer at the moment, but they're part of the EU, and the EU is imposing this kind of chat control, which no one talks about because the mainstream media are not reporting it. And so the people are reporting on the alternative media don't have enough clout or readership. But this is going to allow the EU to pre-scan people's messages before they go out on WhatsApp. So they can't actually crack the WhatsApp code, which is end-to-end encrypted, but they can read your messages before they go out. In other words, read your screen or something. And they're going to allow this to go through. And I think there only was a couple of holdouts at the moment. And of course, no one follows EU politics. As you rightly pointed out, and I was pro-European, I realized this, but as long as it was harmless, it was harmless. But now it's being used to full totalitarian effect. I'm very, very against it, We'll all have to move to America or get our VPN set to Atlanta or something.
Yeah, there is always the VPN.
Or they might ban VPNs. Who knows?
There's been talk of that as well, believe it or not. Yeah. Yeah, that may be coming down the headline. Pele Niroth-Taylor, academic, filmmaker, and journalist. Tell us what you're up to at the moment. What was the?
Well, I was in the
film
UK for a
in
month, and I was
research?
doing a documentary on child abuse, which is not a favorite topic of mine, but I feel compelled to do it because it's alleged to be tied in with all these blackmail of politicians that's so said to go on. I do it with holding my nose, and then I'm doing something on free speech, which covers the issues that you and I talked about. And Christine Hart, I think she's a host on your channel. She had some really interesting things to say about how MI6 destroyed the news of the world in the hacking scandal of 2014. And it wasn't the left-wing journalists that took out the news of the world. It was MI6. And she makes a very good case for that because she was quite involved in it. So she knows a thing or two, you know.
Why would MI6 have taken out?
Well,
the
because
News
News of the World were used. Well, basically they wanted to put a dampener on British freedom by hitting out at the News of the World. Even the News of the World publishes bad, scurrilous stuff. It's still a powerful newspaper. So if they took on the most powerful newspaper, they'd send a signal to everyone else. And then the fact that News of the World was using SAS operatives to spy on other people, you know. So that, I mean, no angels by any means, but MI6 wanted to show them who was boss. And so
MI6 wanted to show the SAS that they're the boss.
I guess so as well. Yeah, I didn't have a chance to. Yeah, it's interesting anyway. And Nick Davis, there's an ITV costume, expensive drama, again glorifying left-wing journalists with sort of moody pictures of them tapping away at their laptops and evening shots of Westminster, City of Westminster, and the House of Parliament, all that kind of stuff that we're familiar with from the Bourne films, you know. Well, it's all bullshit, you know. So just go search for my name on YouTube in a few weeks' time, watch that, and then be smug when the expensive ITV drama comes out glorifying Nick Davis because he got it all wrong. In fact, he said MI6 are really involved to Christine, and Christine said, okay, I'm looking forward to an expose on them. When the book came out, there was not a mention of MI6. So obviously, you know, he decided that it wasn't an appropriate thing to publish, you know. So there you go.
Pele Niroth-Taylor, thank you so much for joining me today on Countdown, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye.
I'm Basil Valentine. I do hope you've enjoyed today's show. New look, new format, counting down the big global news stories of the day. And I'll be back at the same time tomorrow here on Unprecedented TV. See you all then.
Unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented TV.